Joined once more here by former Governor John Hickenlooper, who is now one of a dozen or so Democrats who are in the Senate primary looking to take on Republican Senator Cory Gardner. Welcome back to Next.
Glad to be back.
Welcome back to Colorado as well. So that the presidential campaign probably didn't go as you expected. What do you think you learned?
You know, I still think of it as a great blessing that I was allowed to, for 8 months of my life, go around the country in places like Iowa, South Carolina, New Hampshire. I talked about what's so great about Colorado, what are the innovations, how did we get to be where we are. But I also got to hear people firsthand talk about their dreams and their fears. And it's funny, people in Iowa and New Hampshire, they take so seriously their responsibility to help pick the next president. And it's a very intimate form of politics. So it was a little bit like Groundhog Day, where every day I'd have to go meet new people who really didn't know who I was, didn't really know where Colorado was, didn't really care. I was just constantly going up that hill. It's great to be back in Colorado, just to be, with so many people, so many friends and familiar places that, now I get to go all the way around the state of Colorado.
You're not used to losing. Was it humbling?
No, I mean, I went into it, I think, with a realistic perspective, and I felt I added value to the debate, right, to the discussion. I felt that, to take on Donald Trump, we needed to have, someone who had more than just political experience, who had experience in business and as a scientist, as a geologist, but also had understood how cities worked with states, worked with the federal government, and could talk about those relationships. This was obviously a hard year, though, to get traction if you didn't already have a certain amount of notoriety.
One of your arguments is that you're best positioned to beat Senator Gardner because you have won twice statewide in a purple state. What if Colorado's not purple anymore? What if it's a blue state and progressive Democrats don't have to settle for a centrist candidate anymore?
Well, in either case, I need to make my case to the voters of Colorado. And I've got to go out and explain to them the reasons why I would be the best person to beat Donald Trump, the highest probability of success, but also how I'm the person to go and be able to change Washington and really push back against Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump and, play a more active role and a more independent role in representing the interests of Colorado.
I think you accidentally juxtaposed the names Cory Gardner and Donald Trump, which is probably a mistake that you don't mind making. You mentioned the idea of an independent senator. So you recently said that Cory Gardner is a rubber stamp for Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump, and Colorado needs an independent senator. So let me ask you, how would you be independent from Chuck Schumer?
Well, I've been an independent person my entire private life and my political life.
You haven't been in the Senate, though. I mean, the Senate runs a certain way. You would report to Schumer. Schumer would direct the action. How would you be independent?
I have said to anyone who's talked to me at any point that I fully intend to go about this campaign as an independent candidate. I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life. But, that doesn't mean you support the party every time. And when you look at my record as a governor, once the election's over, you want to bring people together and try to get things done. Find some common ground that you can build on and create progress. And I did the same thing when I was mayor. Everyone, this is probably before your time, but when I first ran for mayor in 2003, the suburbs in the city of Denver hated each other, and they could never work together. But within a couple of years, we were able to, find common ground around things like water and transit. We built fast tracks in a way that, and we got all 34 mayors to unanimously support fast tracks. That's the most ambitious transit initiative in modern American history. And no one in any other metropolitan area has ever gotten the suburbs and the urban area to have unanimous, consensus support for an initiative like that. And I think that's, again, it's different than Washington. I get that. But I think that's what Washington needs, right? It's so polarized and so partisan, it's become completely dysfunctional.
A lot has been made about the fact that during your run for president, you said that you didn't want to be a senator, you didn't think you'd be particularly good at it. Everybody's entitled to change their mind, but I want to ask you, as somebody who has run businesses, did you hire people who said that they didn't want the job and wouldn't be good at it?
No, I think, I certainly hired people that had originally thought they wouldn't be good at something, but they had to demonstrate to me, A, that they had the passion for it, but B, that they were able to take the skills they did have and transform them or utilize them in a new way so that they could be successful in the new job. And you look at, what I did as an entrepreneur. I brought together businesses and we worked together to try and get Lodo to become a place, and a place of innovation and success. And an entrepreneur to a large extent is a problem solver. You have all these obstacles and you have to resolve them. Well, I took that approach to being mayor. Now, I'd never been mayor. I'd never had anything to do with politics. I didn't think I'd really like it when I first started out looking at it, but I was able to use those skills to really bring people together and solve problems within the city and the metropolitan area. The same thing happened. Being governor is very different than being mayor. It's more similar than going from being a restaurateur and a small business person to being mayor, but it's still pretty different. And again, you have to utilize the skills you have in different ways.
Let's talk about the issue of mass shootings and gun violence. Do you think that any solution to the issue has to include reducing the number of guns in America? And if so, how in the world do you convince Americans to give up guns?
Yeah. Well, we're now at the point where we have almost a mass shooting every day. We're not quite to one per day, but if you average out the last several years, that's what we're approaching rapidly. And I think one of the great problems that Cory Gardner presents for Coloradans is he doesn't even believe in universal background checks. He's voted against expanding background checks to make sure that people don't have dangerous backgrounds when they're trying to buy guns. We're going to evolve over a period of time to have a greater awareness of gun safety. But obviously, many states, and Colorado is one of them, have a long-standing affection for hunting, for outdoor recreation, for gun use. And over the years, that's been tied to the Second Amendment, right? That we also have this right to bear arms, which I think most Americans respect. Somehow we've got to navigate between those fixed points and move our country to a place where we're not facing a mass shooting every day.
I understand that that's your position on gun rights or gun control, but my question was, does America need to reduce the number of firearms in this country to affect the problem?
I assume I was agreeing with you. Yes, of course. But you can't come in and just say, we're going to have 20% less guns. That's not how this country works, right? And it's not the way it evolves. You're going to have things like universal background checks. You're going to have to figure out ways of convincing Americans that it is in their self-interest that we have less guns, and they have to be a part of figuring out how do we reduce the number of guns. And you've also got to recognize that the National Rifle Association and other trade associations that are supported by the people that manufacture the guns, that means they're going to make less money if people are buying less guns, and they're going to push back. That's got to be balanced into the equation as well.
You hear some national Democrats talking for the first time, it seems, like either voluntary buybacks or government-directed buybacks. You think of the Australian model, something like that. Is that totally untenable right now in your position?
I'm not sure. It's not a question of untenable. And I think the Australian model was successful in that moment. They changed gun laws. They did a massive overhaul, but they didn't have our same traditions, and certainly didn't have a Second Amendment that was in direct contrast to that kind of initiative. So I don't think that large-scale buybacks would be effective or certainly not efficient. Let me say that they would probably cost far more than the value they would provide at this point, just because there are so many guns in society right now.
Let's talk about healthcare. Often when I hear you talk about healthcare, I hear you talk about it through the mind and practices of an executive, because that's how you've led. In the Senate, it would be different. You're either going to be in the majority or you're going to be in the minority. So let's talk about healthcare through those lenses. So suppose the Democrats take the Senate majority. You're going to have senators like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker and Kamala Harris who want to pass Medicaid for all, which you oppose. Does that mean that you would vote with Republicans against that, or would you get on board and support it?
No, I think that this is where negotiation comes into play. And this is why I think it's important that you have some people that have small business experience in the U.S. Senate. In the same way that I think you need mayors and former governors in the U.S. Senate. Mayors and governors are the ones who have to implement the policy that the Senate makes. And I think that experience has direct relevance to make sure that you don't have unintended consequences when you put in place a new policy. So in the case of Medicare for all, I believe that allowing people the opportunity to buy into some form of Medicare, if they can't get insurance on the private exchanges, or if they have pre-existing medical conditions that make that insurance too expensive, that there ought to be a way that they can, on a sliding scale, buy into some form of Medicare so they can get coverage. Right? We've got to get. I mean, health care is a right. It shouldn't be a privilege of the wealthy. It should be a right. And that, I think, allowing people to buy into Medicare is the most rapid and efficient way to get to universal coverage, and allows us also to begin addressing the inflation, right? The insurance premiums, the cost people are paying for prescription drugs, skyrocketing, right? Again and again, year after year, way double what normal inflation is, going double and triple the normal inflation. So to address those efficiently and effectively, I just don't see Medicare for all, where you're going to go to 180 million people, 180 million Americans, and tell them they're going to have to give up their private insurance. I
understand that. The question I was asking was not what John Hickenlooper, the leader of the executive, would do, but what would happen when you enter a very different governing scenario in which you might not get to pick the solution. You get to work around the edges of it, and you get to try to compromise. But then at the end of the day, are you so opposed to it that you would vote against it, or you would say, here I am in this deliberative body, and that's what my colleagues want to do? Well,
my answer to you was that that's when you have to negotiate. And what I said was that you need that experience of a small business person, and that also someone who's had to implement the policy, like a mayor and a governor, to make sure you don't have unintended consequences. So that negotiation gets you to a place that you're probably not going to be in either camp. And at that point, it's a question of trying to persuade people, just like I did with the Republican mayors when we were talking about fast tracks, and show them, well, here's another way to think about this. Or when we were closing coal plants down in Pueblo and wanted to replace them with wind, solar, and batteries, not natural gas, but batteries. Again, each one requires a certain, a willingness on both sides to be open to some compromise, some place where both sides get some of what they want. And I think that's part of what the Senate has to do. And in a real way, that's a lot of what a mayor or governor has to do, is negotiate those what turn out to be the best solutions.
I imagine that somebody with your executive mindset would be pretty frustrated in the Senate minority for the next 2 years, but that's a possibility. You could end up there in a Democratic minority with Mitch McConnell still running the Senate. In the past, you've described his actions as treasonous. I'm curious how you would find bipartisan compromise with somebody you've suggested is guilty of a crime which is punishable by death.
Well, what I was saying was that he was trying to undermine President Obama and really restrict the progress of government. He wanted to tie it down. I think that's what people hate. That's one of the reasons why I'm running for Senate, is to try and fight back against that kind of gridlock. And whether I'm in the minority or not, I don't think that's a problem. I think in either case, you've got to be able to reach across the aisle and build relationships and try and create a winning argument for why your solution, or maybe not necessarily your single solution, but some of the values in your solution, should be incorporated into what the final piece of legislation looks like.
Two more things I'd like to touch on. So this week, National Democrats held a climate change town hall. If you end up as the nominee, we're going to have a Senate race where we have a Democrat who's been backed by oil and gas versus a Republican who's been backed by oil and gas. Does that put you out of step with where Democrats are these days?
Well, whatever backing I had from oil and gas was always somewhat limited. Let me say that there was a great deal of mistrust all the way back from when I first got into public life, even when I was still a mayor. I would hold what we've done in Colorado in terms of climate change against any other governor or even any other mayor when I was mayor of Denver. We got methane regulations done, and we were the only state to be able to actually negotiate and find that common ground, so that the environmental nonprofits, and they provided their top scientists, and the oil and gas industry and their scientists figured out what is the effective, efficient way to cut methane. And it became national policy. Actually, Obama allowed that to go out and be for federal lands, be almost like exactly our methane regulations, be the law of the land. Now President Trump is rolling that back. I think the bigger point is to focus on, President Trump and Mitch McConnell and Cory Gardner goes right along with them, are not only doing nothing to address climate change, which is probably the gravest threat that humanity's ever faced. If you're going to be realistic about it and look at some of the unintended consequences that are looming on the horizon, Cory Gardner's done nothing to push back against McConnell or President Trump. And we're at a point now where we've got to we have a very limited window in which we can act. All the more reason for Democrats to fight with each other over, how rapidly you're going in this place or rapidly going in that place. I've said for 20 years we've got to get to a clean energy economy. And I want to get there as quickly as possible. We worked with all the other Western states to create a network for rapid recharging stations for electric vehicles so we can have a rapid transition there. One of the key points when we're in those two coal plants that Xcel is closing down in Pueblo, and we worked very hard with them to make this possible, but they're replacing the coal-fired plant with wind, solar, and batteries, and the monthly utility bill for the customers is going to go down. That's when market forces begin to come into play. The other thing that I think is more important that people should realize that rather than Democrats bickering among each other, we should be focusing on what we do in this country is just a best practice. It will have no meaning, no real purpose if we can't convince the rest of the world to come along with us and join us in this. And that another classic case where President Trump and Mitch McConnell and Cory Gardner have done nothing to slow him down, but he is abandoning the alliances and international relationships that allow us to create global solutions. He's actually making those types of solutions almost impossible.
Last question. Questions based on polls are dumb, which is why I moved it all the way to the end. And this is only halfway a polling question, but the polling suggests that you are going to steamroll the progressive Democrats who are in this primary. One of your primary opponents, Andrew Romanoff, has been outspoken that the national Democrats, the power players in Washington who have picked you as the guy, anointed you as the guy to win this race, haven't just picked you, but they're telling Democratic strategists that if they work for the other candidates, that they're going to get blackballed. Would you here right now tell the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee that that should not be happening and you don't want that in Colorado?
Yeah, I don't think that should be happening, and I wouldn't want to see that in Colorado. I think that this campaign is going to be decided by the people of Colorado. And my commitment and my job is to go out to all 64 counties like I did in 2010, like I did in 2014, and make my case. Here's where I see we are. Here's how I see the situation we face now, where we are. And here's where I think we've got to go. And here are my experiences by which I think I can demonstrate that I am the best person to guide that change. I'm the best person right now to go back to Washington and try to figure out how to allow Washington to become a place where things get done again. Right now, it's a place where good ideas go to die.
Former Governor Hickenlooper, thank you for coming in and taking our questions. I look forward to our next conversation.
You bet. Thank you.
Subscribe to the Next YouTube channel for the best of Next and some other stuff.